The machine gun effect. No, not that machine gun, a different type of sound. I'm talking about the horribly robotic sound of programmed string ostinatos. There is nothing that screams, "I'm not a real orchestra," more than string ostinatos and repeated notes at the same consistency, the same volume, the same velocity. It just creates this terribly unrealistic sound. However, some of the Spitfire audio string libraries have features deliberately designed to get around this issue, and can have you playing amazing string ostinatos in seconds with literally no keyboard skills at all. If you have a string library from Spitfire Audio, I recommend you check this out and see if it's there. Hey, my name is Steve, composer, engineer, and lecturer, and welcome back to the channel. That horrible string sound is a dead giveaway that you didn't get an orchestra to actually play on your track. While you definitely don't need an orchestra to play on your track every single time, it's nice when the listener thinks that it is an actual orchestra playing rather than knowing that it's just software instruments. It'd be nice if they just couldn't tell whether it's virtual or real. Spitfire Audio is an amazing sampling company that has been tackling this issue. They work hard to create amazing sample instruments that give you a professional sound at your fingertips, and they've actually created an awesome workaround for this very issue, the machine gunning effect of the same sample being played repeatedly at the same volume. So let's check it out. Firstly, let's check out a very simple string ostinato I created just with Spitfire's Studio Strings library. So all I'm using is the Spitfire Studio Strings Professional library. Now I've just been using the spiccato, and I actually programmed in all of the MIDI notes myself. Rather than playing them in because I'm not really that great on piano, and I certainly can't do an ostinato this fast and this precise, I decided instead to go through and just click and add each one just with the pencil tool, just clicking and adding in like that. Now what that's done is you can see down here it's created every single note at the same velocity, and every single note is perfectly on the grid, creating this very unrealistic sound. As you listened to it earlier, you may have heard that it sounds just a little bit robotic, way too precise. A human just never would play it like that. A human makes mistakes, and even if they're not making mistakes, they're making slight fluctuations in timing, in velocity, little things, because we can't precisely play the same note perfectly on the grid at the same volume every time. It's just not something that we as humans can do really well. Some can do it better than others, obviously, with a lot of practice and a lot of dedication, but you're always going to have a certain element of fluctuation. Keyboard players as well that play this in aren't necessarily exempt from this either. Sounds weird to say, but obviously when you play in with a piano, it's going to feel different to a string instrument. It's not going to be like a string player, like this violin section playing. It's going to be like a piano player playing a violin section. So even performing it in with a keyboard is just not going to be quite as realistic as it could be. Now Logic, for example, and many other DAWs as well, have some little tools to try and help out with this. For instance, Logic Pro has a feature called Humanize, where it tries to humanize the sequence that you've created. If I come in here and select all of my notes just with Command A and then press Command 9 to get to my MIDI options window, I can then come up to the presets and jump into something called Humanize, and it gives me a way of randomly adjusting the position, randomly adjusting the velocity, and randomly adjusting the length a little bit. That way, every single thing is slightly off or slightly on beat, slightly louder or softer than the other, and slightly longer or shorter, which when we're talking about spiccato notes or staccato notes, it's just not really necessary. So I might take away the length just by bringing that down to 0. There's really no point there. And I can adjust this as a plus-minus range. So it can either go 10 up or 10 down on the velocity. I'm going to leave it at 10, that's quite okay, and 10 ticks as well. All right, I'm going to hit operate, and now when we close out that window, you can see below here that it's adjusted all of the different velocity levels, so they're all over the place, and the timing is a little bit off as well. If I actually zoom in a little bit, you can see they're not all quite on the beat anymore. They're a little bit ahead or behind. It's just something that helps kind of replicate that slight imprecision of human players. So now when we play the ostinato, it definitely sounds better, but it could be improved more. Some of the problems it's facing at the moment is that the timing, and in particular the velocity, doesn't quite line up with a real player. It's definitely better than a flat velocity, but it's not really got that kind of energy that a real player would play. For example, a real player would probably emphasize beat 1 and 3 of every bar a little bit more than other beats. If we take a look down here, for instance, beat 1's quite good, but then beat 2 is actually louder than beat 1 and a hell of a lot louder than beat 3. Not really something a real player probably would do. They would probably emphasize the stronger beats more. It's instinctual, particularly in Western music. So this is where the string feature in some of Spitfire Audio's libraries comes really in handy. Now I'm going to show you a feature called Ostinatum that is built into this library and some of the other Spitfire Audio string libraries and other libraries as well. Over here is what we call the Ostinatum, and this is what we want to use. However, it's grayed out at the moment, and that's because we're on a legato patch. If we're on any kind of patch that's a long held note, like tremolo or the legato or the longs here, that's just not going to work with this. We need to pick a short, like pizzicato or staccato or spiccato as it is in this case. Now we can see that that one's actually lit up, and I can select that, and this is the ostinatum. I hope I'm saying that right, ostinatum. But anyway, it's an ostinato generator. Now this thing is seriously cool because you basically are creating a simple patch that is repeatable, a simple block, and then you just play it like an arpeggiator. If you've done anything with synths before, you know arpeggiators are great because they take, say, 3 or 4 notes, and as you play them, it plays each one individually, either ascending or descending or at random. We're basically using a same sort of arpeggiator feeling, but now with orchestral string libraries to create a more realistic ostinato. So over here in this section, you're basically going to create a pattern that you want to do. So let's start with creating a simple pattern to replicate the same pattern that I had before. I'm going to click here, I'm going to click 2 more, so I'm going a quaver and 2 semiquavers, or an 8th note and 2 16th notes, and I'll do the same again. So I'm just going to have 6 repeatable notes. Now you can have definitely some more notes there. I think it goes to 10, maybe even more, but I'm just going to create this short little pattern here. Now the next option below here is saying what key is it going to be assigned to? Is each note going to be assigned to? This is talking about the keys that you are going to be holding down. Now let's say I hold down 3 keys, like a D minor triad. And that's going to be D, F, and A. The lowest key will be key 1. The next highest key, my F, is going to be key 2. And the top key, the A key, is going to be number 3. So it basically tracks how many keys I'm holding down and assigns them to the rhythm. And you can assign which key you want to play on each rhythm. So if I now drag this up to 3, and then drag this one up to 2, and then maybe let's swap that around for these last 2 here. So it's going to go 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to come over to mode, and I'm going to turn this on because currently it's set to off, and I'm going to choose ascending. Basically, when we're looking between these options, we've got ascending where it reads note 1 being the lowest note, note 2 being the middle, note 3 being the top note, descending where note 1 would be the top note, so the A in this case, or the order press. So if I press the A first, then the D, then the F, it'll assign the keys in that order. I'm going to choose ascending, and let's take a listen. Now I'm going to hold down the D minor triad, and you'll see the magic at work. Wonderful, instant ostinato. I'm just holding down a chord, and there it is. Now we could tweak this a little bit further as well, because right now it's kind of doing its own sort of machine gunning effect a little bit, in the sense that it's just playing the same velocity. So I'm going to adjust the velocity a little bit. Down here, we can increase or decrease the velocity by dragging up or down. So I might emphasize number 1 and emphasize what would be our second beat a little bit, but a little bit less than number 1, yeah? And then the upbeat into each of those beats, I'm just going to kind of pull that back a little bit so that we don't play that quite as loud. Let's see how that sounds. That is sounding so much more realistic because we've got bounce, we've got feeling, we've got that sort of instinctual thing that performers will do where they're emphasizing particular beats. It's wonderful. Let's chuck this in descending and see what happens. So you can see that that's switched it around. It's playing an A now whenever the number 1 is assigned to the note. So you can use those orders to sort of change up your ostinato a little bit. Now, if we don't want to play one of these notes, let's say we want to add a rest in here, we can easily do that. I might actually add a few more notes, and we would normally have that set to 3 and 2, 2 and 3. You can see how easy and fast this is to actually do. Now I'm going to take a rest note. Let's say this note is going to be a rest. I just drag that note down, and that now becomes the same duration but as a rest. So I'm going to add a little bit of velocity here and here, pop it back to ascending, and let's see how this sounds. So a really, really cool ostinato generator, and it's actually sensitive to my touch as well. If I am playing a softer velocity, all of that velocity information is just shifted down. So I can play the same sort of emphasis on those notes, but at a quieter velocity, and then hit the keyboard louder and have a louder velocity come out of it as well. Absolutely awesome. It makes it so much more expressive. And now you don't need to be able to play the keyboard at all. I'm obviously playing a physical keyboard in front of me, a keyboard controller, but you could just program these in. So if I create a MIDI region here, and I just want to create the same ostinato that I had going on up here, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to add in my chords. There was a D, there was an F, and an A. Let's drag those out. And then it dropped a little bit. And once more. And here we have the complete ostinato. Now you can hear a little bit of a dig in there where it's almost playing two notes. I find that just by shrinking the note just a little bit so it doesn't actually hit sort of the next bar can sometimes resolve this. For example, in this section here, if I just pull this one back a smidge, and I do the same over here to these two, then we should be okay. Sounding pretty good, so you can finesse it a little bit is what I'm saying. Now there are some more cool features inside this as well. Now we've always been playing 3 notes, but what we can actually do is just play 1 note. Or even 2 notes. The programmed pattern that we've got is going to adjust based on how many notes that we're actually playing. So if we're only playing 1 note, it could be a single line ostinato, a typical kind of ostinato, thereby getting around the machine gunning effect, because it clearly sounded a lot better than that harsh thing that we've heard at the beginning. So that way, like, you could program a pattern that has 4 or 5 different notes in there, depending on, you know, how many notes you're holding down. But then if you have a chord that drops back to 3 notes, it will adapt based on that. So it will still provide some sort of rhythmic pattern that aligns with it, but instead of it kind of missing just 2 notes or something, it'll just adjust for those notes, which is nice. The other thing it can do is a chord mode. When you turn chord mode on, instead of it being individual notes, you just hold down a chord and it will play each chord on the note. That sounds quite nice. I really like how full and beautiful that's sounding. The other thing you can do is you can control using key switches. From C6 up, or you can even change it if you want to as well, you can change certain settings. So for instance, at the moment, I've got it on ascending order, but if I change using the key switch, I can actually turn it off. I can then turn it back on to ascending or maybe descending. Just like that. So you can use key switches to change up the ostinato feature. So you could turn off ostinato feature, so you can play regular spiccato notes, maybe just a short little few notes here and there to introduce the idea of the instrument coming into your orchestration or your composition, and then use the key switch to turn it back on and have that full ostinatum take over. You can also create different versions. We've just created one ostinatum, but I can jump in and go create a second pattern altogether, and then I could switch between those patterns. That's really wonderful too. So there is lots to play with, and this isn't just on one Spitfire library. A lot of the Kontakt-based libraries, some of the ones that I've got, for instance, London Contemporary Orchestra or Albion 1, I think even Albion Solstice off the top of my head, all of those libraries have this feature in there, and it's absolutely amazing. It's not even limited to just strings. I mean, strings is the most common thing for ostinatums, but if you want some ostinatos in flutes, away you go with this library. So really, really cool, really, really useful. So it's great hearing it in isolation with a couple of instruments, but it's nice to hear it in context as well. I want to share a couple of compositions that I actually use this feature to create that sound. And to start off with, here's my score to the Bridgerton competition that was done in the middle of last year. So throughout this track, it was mainly a piano and strings sort of song with a little bit of flute in there as well. So that was my sort of instrumentation for the track. And I had some solo instruments, solo flute, solo violins, violas, cellos, that sort of stuff. But also I had all these string parts. And I decided to use the studio strings because it has a nice kind of small sound, you know, not quite as large, quite as blow you away symphonic, but more kind of subtle, and I quite liked that sort of sound. Throughout my session, you can actually see things labeled OST for ostinato. So in those sections, when I click on that track, that is actually an ostinato track. So you can see that at the end here, if I soloed that up, really beautiful sound. It just has a lovely, delicate sound to it that I really, really liked. And the ostinato feature makes it sound so much more realistic, like a violin section would actually be playing that. So in the middle section here, we can see there are violins in this section. So through that section, you could hear the violins having a running ostinato, but I also used the ostinatum feature in the basses to create a single line. Looking at the bass thing here, all I've done is created a simple repeating pattern, and that pattern has then been used to create single note ostinatos. Very useful feature that avoids the machine gunning that I spoke about earlier. At the beginning here, there's definitely a lot going on with different ostinatos. That enabled it to be able to kind of like bubble along underneath the main melody and not be too kind of overpowering. It just sort of sat there nicely. I thought it worked quite well. Now let's take a look at another track that used this ostinatum feature, but in a different library. It used the London Contemporary Orchestra library. This track was basically using Albion Solstice quite a bit, especially for the inspiration and the start of the track. But then the London Contemporary Orchestra, or the LCO library, really added something cool to it because it's a very loose textural library. It doesn't have the tightness that the studio orchestra did. So at the start of the track here, I actually start after the main sort of melody comes in and starts getting established, I add in these little kind of textural parts of all these different violins and violas, sort of sounds, cellos, kind of bringing it in. It helps kind of create a bit of an air of mystery. Then what comes in is an arpeggiated sequence from a cello to kind of add a little bit of drive and a little bit of momentum to the piece at this point. The cool thing is that it's a little bit fluid, a little bit more loose than some of the other libraries that have this ostinatum feature. Not so good if you want something nice and kind of light and bouncy and in time, but the LCO library just has this kind of magicness to it that just has this, I don't know, intangible sort of thing. I don't even know how to describe it. That's how intangible it is to me. Anyway, my point being that it's absolutely awesome, and I added it in here, and I actually added it in with some violins as well, and the viola. And the viola is using just a single note, so I'm creating a simple single note repeated pattern with the ostinatum, nothing too complex, whereas the others are actually using more of an arpeggiated sequence. If you want to hear where that track is going and you want to hear the other track, you can find them in my SoundCloud link below. I'll also link the Bridgerton score if you're interested above and below too. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that kind of gives you a bit of an example of how awesome the ostinatum feature can really be for your music. If you have a Spitfire library with this feature, try it out now. It is absolutely incredible. If you don't and you're looking for another string library, maybe check out one that has this feature. It could really enhance your production and cut down on time. Your efficiency and production quality will be really, really up there. If you want to check out more libraries with me or more music production features, sampling ideas, synthesis, all sorts of things, why not subscribe? It's a great time to do so. There is plenty more on the way. But otherwise, I will catch you in the next one.